Hey, and welcome back. In this video, we are going to go through the candidate dashboard over here. So first things first, a good thing to note is that when working with Wized and Webflow, what we do inside of Webflow is just to design the skeletal structure. And then for everything that we want to be dynamic or for everything that we want to render for a user to see, we then add Wized attributes. These can be, the value can be titled to anything that you will remember, so anything specific to you. Currently, all of the values are named to very specific elements. So renaming any of these values will cause issues when it comes to loading information. And I'll show you on the Wized side what I mean by that. Okay, so another thing to note for this page is that we make use of Finsweets Filter, so CMS Filter. In this case, we aren't using the CMS, so we use their filter version 2 over here. And if you want to know more about how this works, please go to finsweet.com/attributes/list-filter in order to understand how all of these filters are set up on this template. Okay, going back to the jobs card. So now you can see that we've defined the Wized element over here. And for every one of these that we want to define and allow them to be dynamic, we do the same. So the name, for example, is defined as Wized job name because we are going to render all of the available jobs here. Same goes for the image. Close this. That's going to be the company logo, the description of the job, full-time, date, and then also we define the button. Because since we aren't using the CMS, we can't set a static URL here. If I just set this button to go to the job post for candidates over here, what we're going to get is just a user is going to be directed to that page, but they're not going to be able to see any dynamic information if we define it inside of Webflow. So what we do instead is set an attribute over here and then go define it inside of Wized. Okay, now just going back to Wized, just close this one. We are now on the candidate dashboard inside of Wized. So anytime that you've defined any attributes inside of Webflow and you're struggling to remember what attributes are available on a page, you can simply click the X-ray method, X-ray toggle over there, then you'll be able to see all of the available attributes that you've defined. Closing that. So just starting off from the top for this page. What we want to do is to load all of the jobs available inside of Airtable, right? So all of these jobs is what we want to load for a user every time they're logged into their dashboard. First, what we're going to do is to send a request to Airtable to say, hey, please load all of the jobs inside of Airtable. And that request is called load all jobs. This request, you can see that it calls the Airtable database and then, the Airtable API. And then we then list all of the jobs inside of the job board platform base over here. And then the table itself specific to job posts. And what we want to do is to show all of the jobs that are set as active. So we do not want to show any jobs that have been drafted by a recruiter. So this status over here, these ones over here. So what we want to do is to render all of these jobs for a candidate to see that are set as active. That's why we define a filter over here. So what we're just telling this request to do is to just return all of the jobs that are active. Once you're done with setting up this request, you can then go to the event. So we want to trigger this request every time a page loads. For every request, we set up a event. So it's essentially a trigger. So title the same, we're going to load all of the jobs when that page loads. So every time a page loads, you can set up the trigger over here. What we're telling it is to perform the request that we've defined, and it's going to be load all jobs. And that's it. You've currently set up the request for that. So if I just refresh this page and open up this request, you'll be able to see that on page load, that request gets loaded and pulls in all of the jobs available inside of Airtable. Now to actually define the jobs on the job cards based on the attributes that we've set. Just to open up the X-ray over here and picking the first high level card attribute. So what we want to do is to render all the jobs only if the status for this request. So the status for this request is 200, and that just means that the status was the request was successfully loaded. Okay, now moving on, what we want to do is to render a complete list of jobs, right? In order to do that, we are going to first set the variable, and that will make sense shortly. So we're going to define a variable for loading all of the jobs. In this case, I defined it as v.I. This is the variable we're going to use every time we loop through the jobs to get dynamic information. Okay, and just to open up the value for that, it will be the request, the data for that request, and then the records. And to go back, just to confirm, what we're pulling in is this payload over here, which just says, give me back all of the records inside of Airtable over here. So that just generates a complete list, and you can verify it here as well, a complete list of all of the jobs available inside of Airtable. After you've defined that, you can now move on to setting your elements up to be more dynamic and not static. We start off with the company logo. So anytime you're dealing with images, you would not set it as plain text. You wouldn't set it as a list. But what you want to do is to set it as source, because you're essentially getting the URL of that image. And that's what you want to render over here. Okay, so for that, we are going to, I just open up this again. We are going to call the request that we've defined, go into the data records, and then instead of setting it as a static number over here, because that will just give us one static company image, we're now going to use the variable that we've defined. So not 0, because that will give us a specific record, as you can see here. What we want is for this list to loop through all of our records and give us dynamic company images. So we set it up as v.i. Then we go into the field for that company logo, and then the company logo URL. And if you just click over here, you can then confirm that it is pulling in a URL. Okay, close that, and you've defined the company logo. For the company job name, or for the job name in any text elements, we set that over here where it's under text type, so plain text. The value will be defined almost the same way as the company logo, but in this case, we're going to choose the field for job name. So again, we won't define it as a static 0, because that will just give us one job name, and that is not what we want. What we want is to loop through all of our records and give us dynamic job names. So we set it up as the variable that we've defined, go into fields and extract the job name. That'll be the same for years of experience, salary range, job one-liner, job type, location, and then we go to job date. So inside of Airtable, our job date currently pulls in as this value. But what we want is to give a user a more legible job date. So what we do is, yes, pull in the date created that we get in Airtable, but we're going to just restructure it so that it's more legible for a user. And that's what happens over here. And you can click over here and confirm that that has been converted. And now we have the job button. So for this page, for this specific section, every time a user clicks on this button, what we want to do is to direct them to this page, the job post candidate page. We direct them onto this page because we do not have a Webflow CMS. So this page over here acts as our template page for every time a job has been clicked. So inside of Wized, what we're going to do is to set up a parameter that will essentially take the job ID to that page as well as the member ID. And the member ID is the ID of the member that has created the job post, so the recruiter's member ID. And that will tie in when a candidate has to apply for a job. Okay, so what we're telling this button to do is to send the job ID. So load all jobs request. We get the job ID over here. We also get the recruiter's Airtable ID over here. And then we set the URL where this button is going to go. And to set a URL, use this specific name. And then the value will be the job post page, so the slug for our job post page over here. And then the parameters that we've defined. So in this case, we're going to use the job ID parameter over here. And that's just to send the job ID to that page. So what we get back is what we've just defined over here. And just to show you how that works, if I click this button, I should see the automation expert job post page and nothing else, right? I will not see this page as bare as it is because we've defined all of the job details on this page. Just to confirm that I'm loading the correct record, I'll go to general and then the URL over here. If I just expand it, you'll see that it's giving me the specific job ID as well as the member ID of the recruiter. That's how you confirm that all of that information has been pulled in and you're going to be able to show the specific job information on this page. We'll touch on how to set this page up in the next couple of videos. Just going back to the dashboard. Okay, so now we have successfully loaded all of our jobs. So now every time a candidate applies to a job, all of their jobs are going to go to active applications if a recruiter sets the status of their job application. So on this page inside of Webflow, what we have is, if I just go to that tab, what we have is two elements. You'll see this wrapper, which is essentially our empty state with the attribute of Wized, no pending applications. So this card will only show when a user does not have any active applications. So then we have the applicant's item, and that has also been defined as candidate home pending jobs. Within that, we give it specific attributes as well, something that we are going to remember. So pending job name, and then this is the status, company, website, and then again, the logo of the applied job. Inside of Wized, we just move this. Okay. Inside of Wized, what we're going to do on this page is to, again, load the list of all the jobs that a candidate has applied to. We're going to create a new request over here. Okay. So our new request will be load candidate jobs. What we're telling this request to do is to get a list of all of the jobs in the job applications over here. And then we're going to set up a few filters. So we don't want to pull all of the job applications not tied to a specific user. So what we're going to do is filter out the applicant Memberstack ID, and that has to be equal to the logged in. So we're going to reference another request. So this one over here for a Memberstack. What we're going to do is to say, hey, inside of Airtable, so the job applications for this field. So for the applicant Memberstack ID, I want to make sure that it is equal to the logged in member. So I do not want to show any other applications that are not tied to this member. Okay, so now that that has been defined, applicant Airtable ID is equal to the logged in members Airtable ID. That's correct. It comes back as that ID. Now we'll only see that applicant's jobs. So we've defined the request. Now for every request, we define a trigger. We go to load candidate job application trigger, and we want that request to load only when the first get logged in member request has finished loading. So once that request has finished loading, and then we set up a condition to say, yes, only run this request when the get logged in member request has finished loading, and the role for that payload over here. So the role for that member is currently set to candidate. Confirm that, and that is true. And then we're going to perform the request of load the candidate's job applications. Once you've defined all of that, so your request and your trigger, you're now going to be able to set up your applications element over here. Okay, you have now your home pending jobs. What we're going to do is to render this card only if, because we're going to show active applications. So we don't want to see closed applications in this section, right? So we're going to create a function. And this function essentially says, okay, so all of our candidate applications have a specific status, right? So what we want to show for this section is the status for that job application should be either screening or hired and nothing else. And that will make sense shortly because we also have to define the closed applications. So we're going to render this section only if the applications, so a user's job application over here, is either screening or hired and nothing else. And again, we're going to loop through all of these job applications with a variable. So we define the variable as v.i. The list value, again, will just be the record ID. So the record itself. So that just gives us back all of the records inside of our job applications. And then we can start setting up the dynamic information. So again, the image is defined the same way, but in this case, we're calling a completely different request. So what we want to do is to call the request of load candidate job applications, because that's what we're going to need a user to see. Okay, so just to open up this request for candidate applications over here. For this image, we want the record of company image. So we're just going to scroll all the way down, and that's what we're going to get here. And you need to define it very specific in order to get back the company image. So we're going to go into the field, use the variable and not 0 because we want all of our job applications to be dynamic with their own dynamic information. Fields, and in the field, just make sure that it is referenced correctly. And it will be company logo, and then that's from recruiter, from the recruiter ID, and then you'll get back that. And then at the end here, you see that we reference another variable. And that again is just to make sure that the information that we get back is going to be dynamic. Okay, so every time you are not sure exactly what variables are or how a certain request works inside of Wized, please reference Wized documentation, and you can find that over here. So Wized has a very thorough documentation that you can go through as well as their YouTube videos. Okay, so going back to, now we have the job name. So again, we're going to set that as plain text, and we're going to load in the candidate job applications request, data, records, the variable, fields, and then we're going to get back the job name. And that's going to make sure that it comes back as dynamic. The status over here. So the website is the same as the job name. Obviously, it's just set to company website. Job status. So we're going to set the job status as plain text. And you can verify that inside of the request over here. And there is the status. So it's records.0, but we want it dynamic, so we use the variable field status hired. What we want to do now is to set it up to be a little bit more user-friendly and to give the user the sense of a tag. So we're going to set a style of background color. And we are, with this request, we are going to just set that over here. With this request, we're going to, still use the request that we've defined, and then the status. So status side. So what we're telling this request to do is if the status inside of Airtable is screening, then we're going to give it a background color of this. And if it's hired, we're going to give it a background color of this. And just to explain this, if I set this status to screening, and then I reload the page, I go to active applications, you'll see that the color is completely different from the hide tag. And that's just for UI purposes for a user. Go back to hired, refresh the page, go to the active tabs, and then you'll see that is also hired. So I've defined the background color, and I'm going to do the same with the text color. So with that request, the status field, I want the text color for screening to be this, and then the text color for hide to be this. You can change these text colors as you see fit, and that won't break anything. Okay, going to close jobs. You can see that a user currently doesn't have closed jobs, and this is going to show when a user doesn't have closed jobs. So it's essentially the no closed jobs wrapper. And we have a function over here that says, hey, if I load all of these jobs, so if I go to if I trigger the load candidate jobs request, and there are no rejected jobs, so the status for all of these jobs are not rejected, then essentially show this card. Okay. Inside of Webflow, if I just go to this tab, you'll see that it's set up the same way as the active tab, but we just have different attributes defined. So for the active tabs, you'll have candidate home or home pending jobs, and then for the closed tab, you'll have closed jobs. And it's set up the same way as the pending jobs, but it's just going to filter for closed jobs. Okay, so if I set this to closed, just to elaborate. So all of these statuses are defined on the candidate side, and I'll be able to show you that in the next couple of videos. So if I go to closed jobs, you can now see that we have a closed job, and all of these have been defined to show the information for that closed job. So we, over here, render, yes, all of the jobs if the status is rejected inside of Airtable, set the variable, and then load the information for that element over here. So with this request that we've defined earlier, and then we go to the company logo, same as the setup for active jobs, plain text, set that up as the job name, and then the job status over here. We don't have to set the color for this because all of the rejected jobs are going to have the same color, so you can set that up inside of Webflow, but using the style tag. So just go to not approved, and then you can define that color over here. It's not necessary to define that inside of Wized. And that is it for the closed jobs. I believe that's it for the candidate dashboard. In the next couple of videos, we're going to tackle the job post page to show you how data is rendered on that page when a user has clicked this button. See you in the next one. Bye.